The topic? The Bible. Socialist doorstop or evangelical field guide? The answer tonight on Now See This Here Now Then. Hello, I'm Richard Cranium. Tonight we flip through the highly divisive book, the Bible, one of the most controversial books in history, behind Hitler's Mein Kampf, Marx's Communist Manifesto, and the Wiccan parable Goodnight Moon. But first, this is the part where I read you a made-up letter from a made-up person in an attempt to amuse you. This week's letter comes from Billy of the Grand Canyon, who writes, Dear Mr. Cranium, I have lost my job, my wife, and my dog Spot. I am currently standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon. What should I do? Well, Billy, I say go for it. There are a few times in life where you are presented with such an opportunity. Yes, what is it? Oh, I see. Right. Well, that does change everything, doesn't it? Billy, it appears that my producers are concerned with your well-being and would like for me to pass on that you may need to seek professional help. You know, Billy, I have been seeing a therapist myself, and I can tell you with utmost confidence that they can help you leap back into your life so that you can spread your wings and fly like a bird through the glorious air of endless possibilities. All of us here at Now See This Here Now Then hope you land on your feet as you step out to find solid ground. I feel very charitable now. The Bible. Some see it as the literal word of God, a book to construct your life after, or a historical chronicle of God's hands playing in the sandbox of humanity. Others see it as a chain that binds people to monogamy, capitalism, and Hebrew national hot dogs. But exactly what is it that creates the sharp lines that divide us in interpreting this work? Observe Exhibit A.
Now, the difficult problem for any theory of biological design is to explain the massive statistical improbability of living things. Statistical improbability in the direction of good design. Complexity is another word for this. The standard creationist argument, there is only one, they all reduce to this one, takes off from statistical improbability. Living creatures are too complex to have come about by chance, therefore they must have had a designer. This argument, of course, shoots itself in the foot. Any designer capable of designing something really complex has to be even more complex himself. And that's before we even start on the other things he's expected to do, like forgive sins, bless marriages, listen to prayers, favor our side in a war, disapprove of our sex lives, and so on. Complexity is the problem that any theory of biology has to solve. And you can't solve it by postulating an agent that is even more complex, thereby simply compounding the problem. Darwinian natural selection is so stunningly elegant because it solves the problem of explaining complexity in terms of nothing but simplicity. Essentially, it does it by providing a smooth ramp of gradual, step-by-step increment. But here I only want to make the point that the elegance of Darwinism is corrosive to religion precisely because it is so elegant, so parsimonious, so powerful, so economically powerful. It has the sinewy economy of a beautiful suspension bridge. The God theory is not just a bad theory. It turns out to be in principle incapable of doing the job required of it.
I don't think that man had a mother. Hostility towards religion as an institution is understandable, as I too find it hard to trust anyone who is that happy for no reason at all, willingly gives up their time to go door to door selling something they will never make a dime off of. or leaving small, rather well-published magazines of theocratic crossword puzzles and articles on the evils of birthdays. But to cancel out the opening chapters of a book that paint a rather simple tale as too complex to make any sense is disingenuous in the least. What tends to happen with people like our motherless friend here is that they are reacting to the shared insistence that the Bible has to be taken literally, in the sense that the events of the Bible actually happened, regardless of evidence to the contrary. However, if we were to step back from reading the book as something that actually happened, and instead, as in the case of the first chapter of Genesis, pay attention to what the passage says in a metaphorical way, what Mr. Dawkins and so many others would realize is that the order of creation as told in that one chapter parallels almost perfectly with the larger sequence of evolution. What the real question we should ask is not whether it proves God's existence or proves that the Bible isn't as far off from scientific proofs as we once thought, but rather, how did a people more than 3,000 years ago figure that sequence out without Darwin or modern science? Now I know what you're thinking. Richard has going God on us. Not necessarily. While atheists dismiss the Bible as fable, there are plenty of fundamentalists who not only teach the Bible as literal, but also use the Bible in ways to twist their message in dangerous ways. Observe Exhibit B.
News alert, the sodomite rainbow house hates their neighbors. God is the supreme creator of all things, and that includes definitions. God defines what it means to love your neighbor. Start in Leviticus 19, 17, and 18. And Jesus Christ said, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." Therefore, by this command, we must love our neighbors at the sodomite rainbow house, who deceitfully go by the name planting peace, by instructing them in what it means to love your neighbor. Let's dissect that command from Jesus Christ. Thou shalt love thy neighbor. Thou is you, meaning every human. Shalt is the command to do it, and you will do it if you love Jesus. Love, doing all the good that you would have done to yourself and hindering all the evil you would preserve your own self from. Thy neighbor, that is your fellow human being. You must love your fellow man as much as is in your power in temporal and spiritual things. Meanwhile, our literal neighbors going under the alias planting peace do not love their neighbor. They pimp soul-killing lies for profit. They try to accumulate so-called good works under the delusion that they can save their soul. No amount of philanthropy can get anyone into heaven. Their toxic charity they boast of will have its reward. If you're going to give alms, Jesus Christ commanded how you should do it. Take heed that ye do not your alms before men, to be seen of them. Otherwise ye have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. Therefore, when thou doest thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But when thou doest alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret himself shall reward thee openly. Planting peace perverts hate their neighbors. They just want their praise. The Equality House is nothing but a polio-infected blanket distribution center, a deadlier sight than Chernobyl. And if you haven't heard, they're expanding down the block. Warning, do not be deceived. The sodomite rainbow house hates your very guts and soul. WBC, in fact, loves you. God is witness.
Interessante. What our rather healthy bigoted friend is doing in this video is a common but old tactic among many fundamentalist Christians. String enough of the same sounding out of context verses together and spin them with the desired result of scaring people into believing whatever you're selling. It's like an old saying my grandpa Cranium used to tell me: if you throw enough shit at a wall, eventually a radical right-wing white man will call someone a fag. But not all congregations are in the business of conning their followers. Unfortunately, those are not the ones who grab the headlines or the attention of atheist evolutionists in seek of love of a mother. In most cases, congregations across the nation focus on one of the core messages of the Gospels, charity. It is where tonight's thesis lies in wait. While there have been many volumes of books written on the finding of the real Jesus or the technical explanations of an omniscient God, the books written on how to love thy neighbor seem suspiciously absent when discussing the merits of the Bible. Instead of heeding or learning from the thousands of lessons presented in the Bible, or examining how the Bible can be used as a universal guide to charitable relations, as a culture, we tend to cling to the notion that if I'm not a faithful Christian, the Bible has nothing to say to me. I mean, it does say that slavery is okay, and to me that is so not on fleek. It reminds me of something my wife Vega told me the other day when she said, "Richard, if it wasn't for the family fortune, I would have divorced you on our honeymoon." The poetry that lives in that woman's breast sends quivers down my spine. In faith, it is the book to follow, not as the single continuous narrative that it is presented as in sanctuaries all across the nation, but as a collection of lessons to be adhered to in their relationship with God. Whether the stories of the Bible happened or not is irrelevant to what they say about how we live with ourselves, our families, neighbors, and with God. For those not of faith, it creates more issues if you allow the actions of fundamentalist extremists to dictate how to interpret a book that is open to so many interpretations. So is it all real? Well, yes and no. If you throw it at someone, it will hurt. Is it a good book? Well, that is objective for the reader to decide, as with all books. Is it worth all the fuss we create over it? No. Why? Because we tend to forget that it is simply a book. In the prologue for his book, Breakfast of Champions, Kurt Vonnegut, speaking of World War I veterans, noted that at 11 a.m. on November the 11th, 1918, the guns stopped, and in the silence of the armistice, the men in the trenches heard the voice of God. It has always reminded me of the passage from the Gospels, which records Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, as he asked God if there's any other way besides the sacrifice of his own life. God responds in silence, making the answer rather clear. In all of this talk about whether the Bible is factual, fable, moral tale, or the Word of God, a lesson can be taken from the Gospel and later interpretation of Mr. Vonnegut by simply listening in the silence for the voice of God, whatever that voice may sound like for each of you. And always remember that the Bible is a collection of stories about human beings trying to simply live better lives. In their mistakes, they show that they are not divine. Yet the larger creator of the Bible loves them unconditionally. And in the silence of words on the page, he can be heard rather clearly. And that is all for this week. Next week, coffee, socialist elixir, or evangelical sermon juice. You decide. For now, I'm Richard Cranium. Ta-ta.